Recently I did a video where I performed my tune Just Another Space Odyssey using a keyboard rig consisting only of Roland keyboards. And today I'm going to show you how I did that video. So the tune is from my first album called To Jupiter and Back, and that album was like a tribute to all the great synthesizer music I grew up with music by the likes of Jean-Michel Jarre, Vangelis and Mike Oldfield. So I was really inspired by that music. Especially for this particular tune, I was influenced by Jean-Michel Jarre's Arpeggiator tune. So what I did with this tune is I used Roland Phantom as the sequencer and also as a sampler and sound engine, of course, as well. And basically what I'm doing is I'm able to control all the keyboard rig using the Phantom, just selecting the synth I want to control, because all the synths are connected to the Phantom. So it has two MIDI outs. So I have one MIDI out that goes to a splitter box that splits it up into 8 cables that goes then to all my synths here. Except for my Juno 60, I decided to use MIDI out number 2 to control especially Juno 60 because it has an old retrofit, MIDI retrofit, and it's really allergic to other MIDI data on the same cable, I've noticed. So I decided to only use have a dedicated output for that one. So all the synths are mixed by a digital mixer, and so I try to get as much separate outputs as possible. From the Phantom, I currently use only the sampler engine, so I have sampled a few of my sounds from old analog equipment. Effect type of sounds. So those I control with the sample pad, and then I have a brass sound that I control as well with the Phantom. And it also actually is connected to the Juno 60 at the same time, so you can hear the Phantom only, and then the Juno 60, here it is. So when we combine those two, then we get that. So a bit more body to the sound. You might ask yourself, why do I have this many synths for this particular tune? Well, the original reason is that I used a lot of different synths for the tune. I had actually all of the vintage Roland synths you see in the rig were originally used in the tune, except for the JX8P. Because I used an Alpha Juno 2 previously for the lead or in the original tune, but then I realized when I got the JX8P, I didn't have it at the time when I did the album, but then when I got it I realized that this sound was much better for the lead of it. So I stuck with that and I've been using it live ever since. But to the rest of the synths, so I have an Alpha Juno 2 for doing sounds like. Back to the reason why I use this many synths, and so originally I was using only vintage synths and vintage analog synths, and I can only produce one sound at a time, and so to be able to construct the whole mix you need to have many synths. Well, in theory you could use only one synth, but I've noticed that if you just try to produce a whole like full sounding mix using only the same analog synth, you end up with a certain sameness in the sound. It's really difficult to get an interesting mix because no matter how powerful or complex the synth would be or how many features it has, you still have the same oscillators that generate the sound, and it tends to produce a certain sameness. But when you use different types of synthesizers produced at different ages and by different brands, that brings it's much easier to get a full mix, especially using only analog synthesizers like I do. Now for this particular tune, I had already a lot of vintage Roland synths, as I mentioned. I had a Juno 60, which is used, except for the brass, it also does arpeggios. that type of sound, and in the break part, in the middle part of the tune, I'm doing kind of a harp type of sound. That comes also from the Juno 60, and then I switched to the brass type of sound for the last part. And I have an Alpha Juno 1 as well that does the main kind of bass sequence in the beginning. So that comes from the Alpha Juno 1. And then I have a Roland TR-808 as well. This is MIDI equipped, so I can play it from the keyboard here. But in the original tune, I used only one sound, and that was the snare drum. So that's the sound that comes from the TR-808. But then I had a lot of other brands as well. And now when I wanted to recreate everything using only Roland keyboards, I chose the modern ones for recreating it. So the TR-8S has built-in 909 models. So the kick and the snare is the modeled 909 sounds, and I'm able to play it from the keyboard here. So I purposely put down on the attack transient from the snare drum, because I double it with the 808 sound. So you get like, you have the 808 snare and the 909 snare, and then when you combine them, so that's my main snare sound. And then I have toms as well, which are sampled, and then I have again the effect sounds that we're using, and cymbals. And then I use the SCO2 for duplicating the sound, which I originally was using an old Moog source for. And but this is basically a mini Moog clone, so got really nice bass sounds with it. So that's the main bass of the tune. And the GDXA has two functions. So I'm using the analog part of it for replicating a polysynth sound. That's the sound that it produces. And then on the I use the digital side of it to give a string sound. So I can play those simultaneously because they are on different parts. So that's really convenient. Originally I had an Alpha Juno 2 for the lead sound. But then I started using a JX8B instead, because I like that so much. So now when I decided to do a video using only Roland keyboards, I wanted to explore the new Jupiter X, because that has a built-in JX8B model. So I've recreated the sound from the lead sound from the JX8B to the Jupiter X. So this is quite exciting how close you can get with the new model expansion sounds. So this is the JX8B model expansion. But it's difficult to play at the same time, because they have they respond slightly different to the keyboard. So I think the Jupiter X has a bit wider dynamic response. So it's a slightly different playing style that you require. So in the original video I used also a System 8 and a Jupiter XM. But I just couldn't fit them this time. I used the System 8 for replicating the Juno 60 sounds, and the Jupiter XM was basically the same as the same sound as the Jupiter X had. So that one I didn't need, and then the Juno 60, it would be of course a bit more convenient to have another synth, because now I have like 3 different sounds from the Juno 60, so I have to switch on the fly. But I'm quite used to it, because I'm doing that live as well, so that's okay. In principle, I could do the whole tune using just the Phantom, but it is quite a lot of work anyway to program patches to be as similar as possible to the original patches. So Next up, I'm going to show you how I did the performance using the Phantom sequencer. So in the first part, I build up the tune on fly. What I do, I record MIDI loops. So basically, it's similar to, you've seen artists that use looper pedals. They record, for instance, a bass, and then it starts looping what they just played. And then they put on a guitar part, for instance, and continues like that. Well, this is the same principle, but instead of recording any audio, I record only the MIDI data, what I perform on the keyboard. So that way, when it plays back, every time it plays back, an audio loop can be quite static. It's the same, or exactly the same audio, but when it's MIDI, and these are analog synths or virtual analog synths, each note will anyway be different. Each time the loop plays, there will be slight, minute like differences, which makes it more lively, I think. And the second part of the tune, then I trigger a pre-recorded part. Well, pre-recording is the wrong thing to say, because it's actually a pre-programmed part. So I kind of programmed a backing track for myself. And then I play on top of that. So that's the way I've constructed the tune, and in the beginning, basically, I show an example of how this works. So I just start the sequencer. I put input quantize to grid, and I have a resolution of 32 because I put the tempo to 62 beats per minute. It might be actually 124 minutes, double that, but okay, for some reason I wanted to stick to 62 instead. And then I have count in as a wait node. And then what I've done, and this is quite important because I'm moving quite fast from part to part when I record, and so I have the length of each track. Or it might be that I even can for each cell, but at least for each track I can set the length differently. So I have really like, this is much planning required. So I know exactly, like for the beginning part I just need 1 bar. For the bass part I want 2 bars to loop, and then for the drum bar I want 4 bars to loop. And this I've set already in pre-programmed. So the length of the clips are known. So then when I have this set, I just try to remember the tempo, and then I start. And then it continues looping what I just played, and it just plays back MIDI data, and what it controls this synth over here. And then I start adding on top of that, and what I can do as well, I trigger the effect sounds to make, well, that's from the original as well, basically. And then at the place where I want to start, I start recording the bass. This is just a 1 bar line, but I have 2 bars because I want the second bar to be empty. So then when it continues to loop, then the second bar stays empty. And then at some point I stop the bass because I don't want that sounding anymore. I have to put the octave up, and then I'm going to record the Jupiter X. And I switch to track number 5, and then I start recording that one. And then it loops. And then I take back the bass. And this is what, this goes really fast later on, but I'm taking it slow now just so you can see what I'm doing. So then I switch to track number 8, which is the GDXA, and then I add basically double what the Jupiter X is playing. You can hardly hear it, but it's there. And after that, I again mute the bass, and then I put the Alpha Juno 2 on top. and then that loops. And then I take the bass back. And then I start playing the string sound on the GDXA. And then I trigger as well the effect sounds. And then I start playing drums. Then that loops. As you noticed, I use 2 fingers for the snare drum because I have 2 snare drums that are doubled. But when I have quantization on, the Phantom automatically quantizes what I play, so it will sound tight anyway. And then I just continue basically. And then I basically at some point I just go to the second part of the tune. So I just trigger it. So you get the idea. At some point I switched to the, because the Phantom sequencer is limited to 32 bar loops. So I have had to split up the backing track. So I have the slow part, which comes here. So that one I have like separately. And so on, and that builds up. And the interesting thing is that something I forgot to mention, namely, is I'm controlling the filter of the Juno 60 with a CV out from the Phantom. This is really convenient because you're able to put, for instance, I have put aftertouch on the Phantom for controlling the Juno, but I'm not using the aftertouch. It's in the pre-programmed part, so I programmed how the aftertouch, how the filter should be affected on the Juno 60. Let me see if I have it here. Yeah, so this is the, I mean, without it, it sounds like this. But then, because the CV controls the filter, so it basically what it does, it raises the filter and then it lowers the filter. Okay, you could use that with the key flow parameter as well on the cut-off keyboard follow on the Juno 60. But for some reason I didn't do that, because then I can really control it. So you can hear that it increases. Now it's much brighter than it was in the beginning, and then towards the end it will die away again. So this is convenient because you can control your old gear using the Phantom as well. And yeah, and then I have I think I put just for making mixing easier, I have the sample pads go through the sub outputs, and then I have the brass sound going out from the main output on the Phantom. So that's basically how I perform the tune, and next I will perform it for you. So that was just another Space Odyssey.